couple minutes in, so I think I've got everybody joining that needs to be. We might have more people as well. But Randy, if you want to start, and then I'll take over.
Excellent. So hello, everybody. Welcome to the seminar with Dr. Rumsey. The Tri-State Cooperative Coalition reached out because we have these new regulations and we wanted to give an opportunity for everyone to ask questions and to get, I know everybody's has had an interest in making sure this is all done right, and Dr. Rumsey has been so generous with her time, and so I just want to welcome Dr. Rumsey to the seminar and for her time, and welcome all you for joining, and thank you. Just a couple of things that will happen during the seminar. Please do not unmute yourself. There is a chat box for everybody to access to ask questions that Dr. Rumsey will do her best to address all of them that wasn't addressed in the seminar. But please, when you do the chat, please put your contact information. If you are able to put either your phone number or your email along with that, but we at least want to be able to contact you in case your questions weren't answered so that we can follow up with answers to those questions. So it's important that when you ask the question to put some type of contact information. All the inspectors are on the call today. We also encourage everybody to reach out to their inspectors and to do any follow-up questions, or if you need any more assistance, they are there for you and are available. So anyway, so without further ado, I will turn this over to Dr. Rumsey. If anyone has any questions about the Tri-State Coalition itself, please feel free to email me at the email that we sent you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions about the coalition as well. So in saying that, hello everybody, happy Tuesday. Thank you for all the work and service you give to the animals, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Rumsey.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I may have to take some brief pauses and let some people in on the presentation, so I do apologize for that because I want to make sure that everybody can get in. Hopefully everybody had a good Memorial Day weekend and is awake for a animal welfare rules and regulations presentation. This sounds oh so exciting. I'll try to make this as productive as possible. If you do have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. There's a lot of people on this, so asking questions verbally can be a little bit difficult. If not, my contact information is going to be at the end of this, and you can email me questions. You can also email Randy questions and or contact your inspector. They are a great resource. There's quite a few of them that are on the presentation today. Not quite everybody is there. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So give me just a second. Okay, everybody should be able to see that now. So we'll go through all of these, and then like I said, just put your questions in the chat and we'll answer those at the end. And then we'll go from there. So my name is Katie Rumsey. I am the Assistant State Veterinarian for the Iowa Department of Agriculture. I've been with the department for a little over a year. I was brought on to oversee a lot of the companion animal programs that we have related to the animal welfare. I was a mixed animal veterinarian for a couple of years early in my career, and then I spent about 14 years in small animal private practice, anywhere from rural practice to urban practice. So back in 2019, IDALS undertook a rulemaking process. And so what that started out was just an internal review of rules. And this was actually department-wide, but really one of the big focuses was the animal welfare rules. They hadn't been updated in quite some time, and there was definitely a need to do that. So we met with a lot of stakeholders. So those included the inspectors that are the boots on the ground for the department. We met with representatives from animal shelters and rescues, breeders, various legislators, animal advocacy groups. So we tried to meet with a lot of different people that are regulated by these regulations. Secretary Nag had given us some guiding principles that we really looked to when we were undergoing the review of the rules, especially if there was question about, well, how do we do things? And the number one guiding principle was the protection of the health and welfare of all the animals in Iowa. And so if there was a question about why we did a rule the way that we did, or why we left it the way that we did, or how we changed it, that was the one thing that we really went and looked at. The other thing that he was very adamant about is maintaining the transparency of inspection reports and regulatory reviews. So all of IDALS inspection reports are available on IDALS' website. You can go to the animal welfare section of that and look at anybody's inspection reports if they're an active business, and you can review those. And so part of this undertaking that we did is that we actually made it a much more user-friendly website to search. So you can search by someone's last name, you can search by the facility's name, you can search by town, you can search by county, you can search by facility type. Whereas before, if you didn't know the exact name of how the business was spelled, you could potentially not be able to find it and not find those inspection reports. So I'd urge you guys to all go out there and look at those. The other thing, the third kind of principle was supporting continuing education and training of not only the inspectors, but those that are caring for animals. And so some of that is going to be via presentations like this, doing consultations with facilities, and then I'm doing a lot of continuing education with the inspectors themselves. So as a general overview, we expanded the definition section. Chapter 162 had some definitions, but we expanded further in 67, didn't change any of the definitions in 162, just to make it clear so people understood what, for example, what does a kennel mean? There's a definition section that we can go back and look at. Also put in more stringent temperature and humidity requirements, added rules for solid resting surfaces if there's wire flooring, there's guidelines for stacked kennels. Primary enclosure requirements were expanded a bit to be a little bit bigger. Increased access to water, really worked to clarify isolation. Isolation's always been there, but to make it more clear, what does isolation actually mean? What are we expecting of that? And the reason for that was to improve biosecurity and reduce the risk of disease spread. And then another thing we did was eliminate dog houses with
Dr.
tethers.
Rumsey, I'm so sorry to interrupt. For some reason, we're not being able to see the screen.
Okay, that's interesting.
I know.
Let's try that again. So you gotta love Zoom. We test this out a couple of times and then right? It doesn't work.
There we go.
Let's try. Yep.
There we go. It's in presentation. One more, yep, and then there. Now
you can see that. Can you see the presentation now?
Yeah, but we can see the next slide that's coming up. I don't know if that matters or not.
Yeah, we can fix that.
Okay.
There, that should be the screen. Is that better?
Let's see. Well, I can tell you this. We can definitely.
Here, okay.
There you go. Perfect. Yay.
Okay, apologize everybody for that. So we're gonna skip through, I'll show you the slides and then we'll skip ahead. So anyway, this was the introduction, kind of the overview that we were talking about. So now we'll get into a little bit about the rules. I'll try to make this as quick as possible and not as boring as possible with our rules. Let me add some people. Okay, so housing facilities. First of all, what is a housing facility? And that's really the room or the building or the area, those outside four walls that house the animals. So are there, you know, is that where their primary enclosures, their kennels are at? So think about that as a building. That's pretty much the best way, or it could be a portion of a building as well. And so the big thing about these is they have to be of adequate structure. They have to be maintained in good repair. So we don't want to see things that are falling down. And so there are some regulations that are, if you're going to house animals exclusively outdoors, they do have to have a way to get away from the elements. So some sort of shelter or doghouse or something along those lines. They have to be over 8 weeks of age. They have to be acclimated to the temperatures. So in Iowa, that can be really hard to do because We have temperatures from -20 with -60 wind chills to 100+ degrees with 115-degree heat index. So that's something to keep in mind, is that they may be acclimated to that, you know, the nice weather that we've been having lately, but maybe not the extreme heat. And with Iowa, we all know that it can kind of swing up and down. So that's something just to be really careful of. If an animal is within 2 weeks of whelping, it cannot be housed outdoors. And any animals that are sick, or if they're old, so the old, young, the ill, anything like that, they cannot be housed outdoors either. And if the temperature dips below 50 degrees, there has to be some method of helping those animals maintain their body heat. And so that could be an added heat source, that could be bedding, that could be insulation, could be a whole bunch of different things. Okay, so indoor housing facilities is where we really change the temperatures. And so it's basically, they can be housed indoors between 45 and 85 degrees. The temperature can't be above or below that for more than 4 consecutive hours. And if the temperatures are below 50 degrees, just like outside, there needs to be some sort of heat source or bedding or insulation or something to help those animals as well, to be able to conserve their body heat. Humidity needs to be maintained between 30 and 70%. And this is on a fairly consistent basis. We are in Iowa. There are times where, you know, like when it was really raining this morning or this weekend, that the humidity goes up, but the building has to have some sort of ventilation means in order to bring that humidity down. And so ventilation, it could be doors, it could be windows, it could be vents, it could be air conditioning, fans. There's a whole bunch of different ways to be able to do this. You know, so air conditioning in and of itself is not required, but there has to be a way to move airflow through the building. And so that will help bring the humidity down. That actually helps bring the temperature down, and then that helps with eliminating odors as well. So the other thing with housing facilities, things that we look at, we're going to look at the ceilings, we're going to look at the floors, we're going to look at the walls. So what makes up that building? And the buildings need to be made in a way that they can be cleaned and they can be sanitized and it can be done efficiently. They also have to be impervious to moisture, and that's animal contact surfaces. So not necessarily say the ceiling per se. Now USDA facilities, that actually would be the ceiling. But any of those animal contact surfaces, so where an animal could potentially come into contact with, even if it's just in a hallway where they're running by to go from, say, a play area to a kennel, they could potentially come in contact with it. So that needs to be impervious to moisture. And the reason for impervious to moisture is that if it's not, then the germs, the bacteria, the viruses can get in there. The sanitizer could potentially get in there, but it's not gonna kill it. And so that could be a breeding ground for issues. And I'll show you some examples here in a second. Floors and walls have to have finished surfaces, again, meaning impervious to moisture to a height of 4 feet. And then we also don't want any jagged edges or sharp edges, anything that could potentially cause damage to the animal, and then also free of excessive rust. So the picture on the side here is a door jamb that was chewed by an animal. And so this is really rough surfaces. There could cause some splinters, but also this cannot be cleaned. This cannot be sanitized. If you look, I don't know if you guys can see my mouse. I think you can, but there is kind of a gap in here. There's some gaps in here too. And so there's a potential for dirt and debris, again, germs to get in here, and that can't be sanitized, but can create a lovely breeding ground. So again, this is not acceptable to see something along these lines. Here's some examples of flooring. We've got 2 really good examples of flooring. This is kind of I think it's kind of a laminate luxury vinyl, these all lock together, and it's impervious to moisture. It's sealed. A lot of facilities that have this, so the dogs don't wear it down. This is more of an epoxy type floor. If you're not muted, go ahead and mute yourself. We can hear a lot of background noise. Otherwise, I've got to end the presentation and mute everybody. So if everybody can mute themselves, that'd be great. Thank you. So anyway, this is concrete. Concrete's great if it's sealed or painted, but it wears over time. And so upkeep is really important. So when we walk into a facility like this, all of this brown here is not sealed, which means, again, it's a breeding ground for germs that cannot be easily cleaned and sanitized. And so that's problematic. And so the expectation is that if you have a concrete floor, that's completely fine, but you have to maintain it. Same thing with an epoxy floor. You have to maintain it. With these laminate type floors, again, maintaining it. If there's pieces that are broken, then it needs to be fixed. This was actually a wood surface flooring that someone did not seal, and they were trying to clean and doing a job of it. However, it was a high moisture environment and it wasn't sealed, and so black mold appeared pretty darn quickly. So those are things that we don't want to see these two. We do want to see these two. And again, concrete floors, I want to make it clear, concrete floors are completely acceptable. They just have to be sealed. Oh, and I think it's another thing about concrete floors too, is that if they're cracked, it happens when concrete settles. You need to put some sort of caulking in there to seal up those cracks. Okay, so storage in housing facilities. We want to make sure that food and bedding are stored in an area where they can't be contaminated, they can't be infested. Mice love dog food, mice love cat food, they love small rodent bedding. So make sure that those containers are sealed up, that bag's got a clip on it, or you use some sort of container, something. The other thing too is that we don't want to see cleaning chemicals next to dog food. We don't want to see chemicals on top of primary enclosures, and we want to see everything free of clutter. So the reason not on top of a kennel is that here's this jug, and you know, say this has a chemical in it that is not meant to be in this type of plastic, and it starts leaking through it, or something happens, maybe the lid's not on, this dog gets really active and it spills it, this dog's now exposed to that chemical. That's a huge safety concern, so we don't want to see that. In this one, I've got household bleach cleaner next to an open can of cat food. Again, what if this spills and someone doesn't realize it? We don't want food and chemicals together. It's kind of the big picture there. And then you can see here's more cat food right next to it. So again, that's not something that we want to see. And then the other thing is that we want to see things that are free of clutter, because clutter is not only a hazard for people. If there's a lot of things stacked on top of kennels and you've got a really wiggly puppy in one of those and that kennel is moving around a bit, that can fall on you, it could fall on the puppy, but it's also a fire hazard. And so those are all concerning, and we don't want to see those. Okay, so then primary enclosures. What is a primary enclosure? And so a primary enclosure could be a room, it could be a kennel, a pen, a cage, whatever you want to call it, but it restricts the animal movement from not being the entire housing facility. And so the big thing is that, again, we want to see sound construction, maintained in good repair, no excessive rust, no sharp or jagged edges, nothing along those lines. And so in these pictures here, we've got quite a bit of rust, and everybody asks, well, why is rust such an issue? Well, rust is porous. Again, bacteria, germs, viruses can get into that, and it's not easily cleaned, it's not easily sanitized. And then also structural integrity. I don't know if you guys can see here, but there's a crack in this. And so the deeper that goes, the structural integrity of that goes down, and then an animal, if it jumps on it, could break it, and then it could become injured. Here's some sharp wire points. Again, an animal can get poked by that, and that can lead to an injury or an abscess, so we don't want to see things like that. Another thing is that a primary enclosure may be of adequate size for a single dog, but if it's a nursing mother, or they need some additional space. So here I have to thank my dogs for participating in this photo shoot this weekend. The lab willingly did this because she was getting some treats. So she was only in here for a few seconds. So I want to kind of just point that out, but they were very happy to participate and kind of show some examples. So the animal has to be able to stand up erect so that their head doesn't touch the top. So you can see with her here, when she's sitting, her head's touching the top and she's crouched down. Here, she can't stand with her head all the way up. This kennel is too small for her. She cannot stand without her head touching the top of it. We don't have an inches requirement above, you know, so many inches above the top of their head. We just basically want them to be able to stand, because being in this position for a long period of time is not good for her neck at all. And so we also want them to be able to lie down with their limbs fully extended, so lie on their side with their legs out. This is one place where we increased the space requirement. We also want them to be able to turn around. So as an example, this little Cavalier here, he's got plenty of room. He can move around, he can lie down. His head does not come anywhere near the top. And this kennel may even be considered a little bit big for him, but again, we want too big, not too small, like we're seeing here with this lab. Okay. So if you've got multiple animals in a kennel, we want them to be able to all fully extend their limbs and not have contact. So as an example, these two kittens are piled up on top of each other. They want to do this. This is fine. But say this guy no longer wants to be by this one, she can get up and move herself over. And so she's got the ability to get away and have her own space. The other thing with cats is we want to make sure that we've got space for a litter box. One thing I don't want to see is a litter box next to a water bowl, litter box right next to a food bowl. So a kitten gets in here and they're just kicking out litter. Litter's got feces in it. It's got germs in it. If this kitten gets really thirsty, they're still going to drink that water. We don't want them to. So just kind of moving that water bowl away a little bit. This is a really big primary enclosure for 2 cats. I actually think there was 2 more cats in here out of view here. So again, we're not looking for necessarily something this big, but this was kind of an example of what I wanted to show you of not having a litter box and food right next to one another and having space to be able to get away if they want to. We don't want them to have to stack up onto one another if they don't have to. The other thing too is making sure that it's impermeable to water. And so again, that's for cleaning and sanitation, that it's easily cleaned and sanitized, and that whatever bedding you're using, it can be easily cleaned and sanitized. It can be disposable if you want it to, but just stuff that can be washed in hot water, basically, with some detergent.
Dr. Rumsey, there's a couple more people, I think, maybe in the waiting room that need to be let in, if you have a chance.
Yeah, there's one person, and I've admitted them 4 or 5 times already.
Okay.
And they're having some connectivity issues. I'll keep trying to.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Yep. Feel free to interrupt me whenever. Okay, so group housing. It's okay to group house animals as long as there's not more than 12 adult dogs or cats in that primary enclosure. The animals have to be compatible with one another, so they have to be animals that get along, and they don't always get along with each other all the time. So just kind of being aware of that group, of the dynamics that are within that group, and removing them if you need to. You can't house dogs and cats together, and they all have to have enough space to be able to move around, have that freedom of movement, and have comfort. This picture here is an example of what not to do. There's 1, 2, 3, I think there's at least 8 dogs in this kennel. This is not acceptable. If these dogs are not getting along, this one cannot get away and get itself away from anybody else that maybe it's not getting along with. There is not enough room for all of these dogs to lie down, let alone lie down without touching one another if that's what the dog desired. So this is what not to do. One thing that we did add is that cats, if they're in a group housing setting, they have to have some elevated resting surfaces, and that's for groups of 4 or more cats. There's some research that shows that cats are much less stressed. You're much less likely to see things like upper respiratory infections than cats that can get up and away. Naturally, cats want to be up high. And so these are some examples of things that you could do. The thing about the resting surface is that it just has to not have sharp, jagged edges, and it has to be able to be cleaned and sanitized. These 2 are actually pictures that I took when I was at Best Friends Animal Sanctuary a couple of years ago in their cat colony rooms. If anybody ever has a chance to go there, it's an amazing place. So they just took some cubbies and put them up on the wall so cats can all get into these. This is not an elevated resting surface, but it shows that the cats can also get underneath it and hide, because cats also like to hide. People kind of forget that they're predator and prey species, and so cats are really good at hiding things. And so they also feel safer if they're up high, or they can hide in things. And so these are just kind of examples of things that you can do to kind of make your cats better. This guy, they've got a whole bunch of, you can't see on the outside of the picture, but there's a whole bunch of steps going up, and this guy's almost by the ceiling, and then they have beams for the cats to walk across and actually go outside. This guy was the guard cat where he guarded the outdoor top access. So they figured out they had to put lower access to outside in that as well, but he loved to be up here. And then we want to make sure there's enough room for all cats. These are my 2 cats, and this happens fairly frequently on this cat tree because it's out where they can look and see at the birds. This cat could care less that this one's mad, but we want to have enough room that they can get away from one another. Litter boxes, we added some clarification with that. So cats and kittens need to have litter boxes at all times. The only exception would be if they're in a facility and they're getting ready to be, undergo a medical procedure where they're sedated, then it can be pulled out, and that's not a big deal. They need to be cleaned at least once daily or more frequently. So this is an example of a litter box that was cleaned once a day, but there was lots of cats using it. And so cats are more likely to develop urinary tract issues, litter box aversion, and pee and poop outside of the litter box. And you guys all know that's one of the big reasons why cats are relinquished to shelter. So we want to set these cats up for success. And part of that is keeping these clean, because these dirty litter boxes, there are some cats that are just not going to use it. I equate this to using an outhouse at an outdoor concert that's been going on all day long. The beginning of the day, it's kind of clean, not a big deal, but towards the end of the day, nobody's cleaned it and they're just disgusting and they just don't want to go in it. And so they're going to hold it and they can develop medical issues or, again, an aversion to that. We want to make sure that there's adequate litter. They don't need a ton of litter, but there needs to be some. Cats like to dig. They like to bury urine and feces. Most do. I guess not necessarily all of them. Needs to be of adequate size. We don't want to have a 15-pound cat in a little, 10 by 12 litter box. That cat's not going to fit in that litter box. Adequate number, that can be either, it can be one big giant litter box or it can be multiple smaller litter boxes, but there needs to be enough for the animals. And then these litter boxes should be cleaned and sanitized on a regular basis, but it needs to be done separately from food and water bowls. So we don't want to walk into a facility and see litter boxes and food bowls and water bowls all together. If you have a separate sink, that's great, but if not, clean your food and water bowls first, clean your litter boxes, and then clean and sanitize the sink afterwards. Okay, exercise. So the rules state that animals should be removed at least twice in a 24-hour period for some sort of exercise. But if the primary enclosure is big enough to allow for some exercise, or they can get exercise within their primary enclosure, that's fine. But these animals do need to get out and about. It's good for their mental health and their physical health as well. Now, there are some exceptions, and we did clarify some of those. So again, if the primary enclosure is large enough for the animals to get some exercise within it, then that's fine. There could be a written exemption from a veterinarian, say that it's a dog with a broken leg, and the vet doesn't want it to have exercise restrictions. They can write an exemption for that. That's fine. If there's a dog that's undergoing a rabies quarantine, or if it's impounded and the shelter deems that it's just too dangerous, it's put in a primary enclosure where it's got some ability to move around, but it doesn't necessarily have to be taken out and say leash walk like this dog here in the picture, because we also need to keep in mind human safety as well. We did eliminate dog houses tethers. This is a picture I stole off of the internet, but this dog is chained outside with a dog house, and this is its primary enclosure. This is where it lives. And so those are no longer acceptable in Iowa. Very infrequently did we find them, but when we did at a commercial facility, they usually just weren't the ideal places. Now you can use a tether for exercise. That's fine. But again, not as a primary way to house these animals. Okay, so wire flooring. There's a lot of controversy over wire flooring, and we recognize that it can be done in a manner that's safe for the animal, but there has to be some requirements put into place. So this is an example of what not to do. This is a small gauge wire. These holes are big. And just sheerly it's uncomfortable for the animal. It's hard to see, but this is not in good repair either. So there has to be a solid resting surface. The animal has to be able to choose to get off of the wire flooring if it wants to, and it has to be big enough for the animal to be able to lay on its side. If there's multiple animals, they all have to be able to get off of this wire flooring. It has to be in good repair, so it can't be rusted, it can't have jagged or sharp edges, and it has to be of a gauge to be able to support the animal, so it can't bend or sag, and it can't pose entrapment. So it may be that there's a wire flooring that's okay for, say, a Labrador to be on, but if she has puppies, that those puppies can get their limbs entrapped in it, or maybe a toe can get entrapped in it, and that is not acceptable. So there are certain situations there are some good examples out there, but again, you've got to meet these requirements. We also put some information in here about stat kennels. Stat kennels could be done properly and would be okay, and there's other times that there's not. So the big things with stat kennels is that they have to be secured so that they can't fall off. Imagine a bigger dog in this, and they're just, you know, so excited to see the person coming up to them. That kennel could fall down. It could hurt them. It could hurt the occupant underneath. And there also needs to be a way to prevent urine and feces, food, debris, anything from going from the top kennel to the bottom kennel. So those are the things that we want to see with stat kennels: secure, and then not having things go between the two of them. So this is an example of, it could be okay if this flooring was okay, and if these were secure. Okay, so food and water, it has to be readily accessible. Animals have to be fed at least once a day. It has to be wholesome food that's suitable for the species of the animal, so not feeding dogs cat food, cats dog food, and also for the age, so feeding younger animals food for growth, so on and so forth. It has to be of a sufficient amount to maintain their level of nutrition. So it has to be fed enough to not be skinny, and then it has to be served in a clean dish or receptacle. So here's a water dish that's just disgusting. We don't want to come in and see it's dirty up in here, but this obviously has not been cleaned, or maybe they tried scrubbing it just a little bit, but this is not clean. This is not fresh water. Water, we increase it from once daily to twice daily, and the animals have to have it for at least an hour at a time, or more frequently as they need it. So if it's hot out, or if they've got a medical condition that necessitates more water, they need to have that. And again, served in some sort of clean dish or receptacle. The other thing about the food and water dishes is that it has to be where they're accessible for the animal. So you can't give, say, a bulldog a super tiny dish that it can't get its face into. So a bulldog is going to need maybe a different kind of dish than, say, a Chihuahua or a Labrador. So just kind of thinking about that as well. Okay, cleaning. So people always ask, what's the difference between cleaning and sanitation? A lot of people think that it's one and the same, but it really isn't. So cleaning is the physical removal of stuff or organic matter. So that's debris, dirt, straw, waste, so feces, urine. You've got to remove all of that, and then you use some sort of soap or detergent or some sort of cleaning agent on that, and then rinsing everything off if that's what the manufacturer's instructions say to rinse afterwards. And most cleaning products do recommend that. Needs to be done at least once a day. However, it may need to be done more frequently than that. So the minimum is once a day, but depending upon how the animals are housed, it may have to be more frequently to prevent the accumulation of debris or organic matter, especially feces, and the contamination of the animal. And we all know that you can clean a kennel and 10 minutes later the dog's going to go in it again, but you know, you have some sort of mechanism to keep that as clean as you can. So sanitation is also known as disinfection. And so just because you clean something doesn't mean that you've sanitized it. The big thing with sanitation is that you have to clean first. You cannot sanitize dirt. You cannot sanitize feces. So if I were to put a sanitizing product, say I was using Rescue, and just put it on here, it might kill the bacteria that's on the top of this. And this is feces, and there's a bunch of mouse droppings. It's probably pretty hard to see on this picture. I apologize. I should have made it a little bit bigger. But sanitizing that is not going to do us any good. So this has to be removed, and it has to be cleaned, and then you can use a sanitizing product. The big thing is to follow the manufacturer's label for how do you use the cleaner, how do you dilute it, what's the contact time. So you can't just spray a sanitizer on and then just turn around and wipe it up. They're all different, and then some of them come in different formulations. So it may be the same brand, but always kind of reviewing those labels to make sure that there's not any changes on those is really important. So sanitization needs to happen at least once every 2 weeks or more frequently. So if you've got a facility that has increased disease hazards or an outbreak, it's going to need to be sanitized more frequently. Okay. So one thing that we did expand upon is veterinary inspection. It was just commercial breeders that needed to be inspected, and we've increased that to basically any facility that houses animals. There needs to be a vet that comes in once a year. They're going to review your program of disease prevention and control. That needs to be in writing, and then they need to have a record of that. IDALS has an example of a vet inspection form. I'm actually in the process of updating this, because this form's a little bit confusing, but it is on IDALS's animal welfare website under the forms. And so you can find it there. You can also use your own version of that, but the basic information that it needs to contain is the date of inspection, the facility name and contact information, the veterinarian's name and contact information, a brief overview of the disease program, disease control program and prevention, and then signed and dated by the veterinarian, and I would suggest that a facility representative sign that as well. But that goes for, like I said, it goes for animals or facilities that house animals. This also then provides an agreement with the veterinarian that they will provide care for your animals or animals that are in your care should veterinary care be needed. So that way it basically gives facilities an emergency contact if they need that veterinary care. There's some of your facilities, some of our bigger facilities that have veterinarians on staff, and they can fill out these forms as well. So I mentioned this a little bit, but programs of disease control and prevention need to be in writing and reviewed by the veterinarian. These can be very, very basic, or they can be very detailed. But we want to just see that there is at least some sort of program that someone is thinking about, well, how do I prevent diseases in this population? How do I control things like intestinal parasites or, say, parvovirus, that sort of thing? If you have an animal that is sick or diseased or injured, it does need to receive prompt veterinary care. So getting it to the vet as quickly as possible. And then if you've got animals that are infected with a contagious disease, so something that can spread from one animal to another, they have to be isolated. So that is in order to prevent the spread of disease to the healthy animal population. And then if you're a facility that is euthanizing animals, then you have to follow the AVMA guidelines for humane euthanasia. We want to make sure if that does happen, that it is done in a humane manner. So let me talk a little bit about isolation. We added some language to clarify what that is. And like I said earlier, it's to prevent exposure to healthy animals. So we don't want the disease to spread from the sick animals to the healthy animals. So it has to be a separate area from the remainder of the animals in the facility. It can't just be a bank of kennels and the last two are for animals with contagious disease, and then you skip 2 kennels and then the rest of them are for healthy animals. It needs to be some way to separate those. It has to have the ability to contain the disease and reduce the risk of disease spread. Again, that's what the whole purpose of an isolation facility is. And so those animals that are in the isolation facility should be cared for separately. Now, a lot of you guys have really small staff, and so what that can mean is that you care for the sick or the healthy animals first. So, and then you go to the sick animals. So healthy first and then sick. If you've got separate staff that can be dedicated to the sick animals and not be around the healthy ones, that's great. But I realize that not everybody has that. And so then after you care for those sick animals, then clean and disinfect, make sure your shoes are clean, hands are washed, so on and so forth, so that you're not spreading it back to the healthy animals. And then all equipment and supplies that are used in that isolation area, you've got to clean and disinfect them before they're removed from the isolation facility, or they can be discarded. But that's to prevent disease spread. People forget that they themselves are one of the easiest ways to spread disease to other animals. And so we as people, our shoes, our hands, our clothing can serve as a fomite or a mechanism that can bring that disease from a sick animal to a healthy animal. So keeping that in mind is really important. Oh, okay. Sorry about that. So vaccinations, distemper and rabies have been in there, but we did add parvovirus. Now the vast majority of distemper vaccines have parvovirus in it. But one thing that we did clarify is that if dogs and cats are under the care of a dealer or rescue, they have to be vaccinated before that dealer or rescue takes possession of the animal. However, animal shelters and pounds can take in unknowns, or they can take in unvaccinated animals. However, those shelters and pounds need to vaccinate those animals within a reasonable time frame of the animal entering the facility. So that could be after they're healthy enough to receive vaccines, after stray holds are up and they haven't been reclaimed, that sort of thing. There's not a definitive timeline, but just, you know, one of the things is we don't want to see an animal that's healthy, that's been in the facility for 3 months and hasn't been vaccinated. Now, veterinarians can provide a written exemption for vaccination. So if the animal is sick and undergoing medical care, the veterinarian may say, you know, hey, I don't want to vaccinate this animal until it's healthy. Have them just put that in writing so that the inspectors can review that. And then titers are not acceptable in place of vaccination. And then just to clarify, in Iowa, there is no medical exemption for rabies vaccination, period, whether that's for an animal shelter or if it is a private citizen. So we get those questions quite a bit. Okay, so transportation. The vast majority of transportation is regulated by the USDA. And so that is transportation between states. So going from Iowa to Illinois, driving down to Georgia and picking up a bunch of dogs and bringing them back. They do have some regulations. And so if you are doing that, you may want to look into talking to USDA Animal Care to see if they require you to be licensed as a transporter or not. We do have some rules for transportation, and that's for transportation of animals in Iowa. And so the big things, primary enclosures, again, sound construction, good repair, and not have anything that can injure the animal. They have to be able to securely contain the animal, so that prevents the animal from accidentally getting out of the car and running loose on the side of the interstate. They've got to have a way to contain urine and feces so that it doesn't get all over the car. And they have to be big enough for the animal to turn around, stand up, and lie down. Now, they don't necessarily need to have to lie with their limbs extended, because they're only going to be in those for a short period of time. They also need to have adequate ventilation, and they also need to be cleaned and sanitized between each trip, or before each trip and between the animals. The animals have to be within the vehicle so that they're protected from drafts or extremes of hot and cold. And so something to be really aware of is that even at 70 degrees, if you stop and turn off the car, turn off the air conditioning, those cars can heat up very, 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 very quickly to the point that an animal can be distressed from that heat. And so a lot of people think, well, it's not that hot out, but really, I mean, 65, 70 degrees could be concerning for those animals, especially if that car is in the sun. The other thing about transportation is how do we care for these animals? So again, you can do group housing of animals, but they have to be compatible with one another. There has to be enough room in each primary enclosure for them to kind of get a little bit of space. We don't want them all packed on top of one another. And then if you're driving in Iowa for more than 4 hours, you've got to stop and inspect them, clean these kennels. If the animals have needs that need to be met, water, whatnot, that you meet those. Now, that's only transportation in Iowa. IDALS can only regulate what happens within the state. And then if they're in transit for more than 12 hours, they have to be removed for some exercise. And the primary enclosures have to be cleaned. And so again, this is what happens in Iowa. Okay, let's talk about records just a little bit. Records are a big thing that the inspectors look at. Most records have to be retained for 12 months. There's an exception with fosters where those are 24 months. But basically, we want to know with these records, where did the animal come from? Where is it gone within your facility, meaning like foster homes, if it's gone from more than one foster home, and where did it end up at? So we want some sort of ID or description of the animal. So age, breed, sex, color, that sort of thing. If it's got a microchip, that's great. If it has a rabies tag, those are great ways to identify it. But as much information to describe that animal as possible. And then again, where did it come from? Whether, you know, so-and-so picked it up on I-80 exit whatever, and how you guys can contact that person, or owner so-and-so relinquished the animal, but as much contact information, so name, address, phone number. Email addresses are great. They're not necessarily required because not everybody has them, but this day and age, a lot of people do. And then where did that animal go? So the foster home or homes that it's in, and then also the adoptive home. So we want to be able to trace the movement of that animal. So say that animal does come down with an infectious disease, we know what other animals and or people that it's been exposed to. The other thing to include is all the medical care that the animal has received. So what medications have been given, what vaccinations have been given, dewormings, if it had a surgery, you name it, what is that medical care? And then also include dates. Those are also really important. So again, to summarize, where did the animal come from and where did it go? Can we trace it through? So one thing I really want to stress about adoptions is that don't adopt out sick animals. The illness needs to be resolved before adopting the animal out. Something that can look like your common kennel cough, upper respiratory infection, the dog starts coughing and it's mild, treating them for kennel cough, you adopt them out and suddenly it's actually not kennel cough and it's distemper and it's spread to other dogs. Those are things that we don't want to see. We want to make sure that those animals are well on the road to recovery and the illness is resolved. Now, there are animals that have chronic conditions and it's completely fine to be adopting those out, but they should be stabilized before adopting, and then they should be adopted with the adoptive home being fully aware of what that condition is. We all have seen and or have had special needs pets, and so the facility doesn't need to keep them, but again, they just need to make sure that things are on the right track for that animal. Okay, so one thing we get a lot of questions about, and I think this is a kind of some area of confusion, is foster oversight organization. So for a facility to have foster homes, they have to apply and fill out the application. Again, that's on IDALS' animal welfare website. And it really needs to be completed as fully as possible. 1 or 2 word answers are not going to suffice. Chances are that application is going to get sent back for more information. But you have to apply and you have to approve them. I try to get through that approval process as quickly as I can. There's some weeks where I have just a couple of them, and there's other weeks where I have a lot of them. So setting them in advance is definitely a good idea. Previously, it was only animal shelters and pounds that could have foster homes, but we've expanded that to dealers and rescues to allow them to have foster homes as well. And so during the first year, you're limited, the organization is limited to 20 foster homes. Now there's a lot of you that have already been approved for foster homes and have been approved for more. And so you have been grandfathered into more than those. If everything goes well, record keeping is good, there's not complaints, there's not enforcement action, then the organization can apply for more than 20 foster homes. That needs to be requested in writing via a letter, and then there needs to be documentation to show the facility's ability to oversee and manage those additional homes. So one thing that I don't want to see is that, well, we have one person that oversees foster homes and now we want 95 of them. That's a lot of work for one person to be able to keep track of. So, you know, letting us know how many employees or volunteers, how many homes, you know, all of that information, the more the better. Now, these foster oversight organization agreements do have to be renewed every year. And so when you get your license renewal, make sure that you include that. And then if you're requesting those additional foster homes, letting us know what that justification is. And you know, why you want those more, and then how you can manage and oversee those. So foster homes have to be inspected at least yearly by the foster oversight organization. And so that's not something that IDALS is going to do, but that's a responsibility of the facility. And then those inspections have to be documented in writing, whether that's on a form or electronically on a PDF or somehow, so we can look and just see. And those inspections can be as minimal or as extensive as the foster oversight organization wants them to be. We just want to see when we inspect the facility that those inspections are actually being done. Now, foster homes are limited to 6 animals in the household, or 6 dogs and or cats. Now, if there's a litter of puppies or kittens under 6 weeks of age, that's only equivalent to 1 adult animal, 1 dog or cat. And then there's no more than 2 litters of puppies or kittens in a house. And what we consider puppies and kittens is anything under 16 weeks of age, excuse me. So I want to go into a little bit about the different types of facilities, because there's a little bit of, I think people are not necessarily clear as to what is an animal shelter versus a pound versus a dealer versus a rescue. So I'll try to clarify some of that as well. So an animal shelter, by definition in code, they're limited to dogs and cats. Now, if they obtain a pet store license, and that allows them to handle small furry critters or feathered fish, so rabbits, rodents, fish, birds, that sort of thing. We're seeing a lot more pet pigs as well. And so if an animal shelter wants to handle pigs and adopt those out, they also have to have a pig dealer license. And that can be anywhere from a pet potbelly pig to a pet just big pig, or it could be, you know, a piglet that falls off a truck and then it wants to be, you know, it gets relinquished to a shelter and wants to be adopted out. A sheep dealer license is also required for adopting out sheep. Now, the rest of the livestock, so cattle, horses, and goats, there are no special licensing requirements for adopting out those. Animal shelters can take in unvaccinated animals, and they can accept owner surrender animals, but they cannot operate as a pound unless they're licensed as a pound. And I'll get into a pound here in just a second. So a pound is for impounding or harboring seized, stray animals, homeless animals, or unwanted dogs and cats. So that's when animal control or the sheriff's department, whatnot, is going to go pick up those stray animals. And then they typically have a contract with a facility, and those would be considered pounds. And so if you have an animal shelter that's operating as a pound, then you need both an animal shelter and a pound license. So there's some facilities that may need multiple licenses depending upon how they're operating. And so if you have questions about that, let me know, let your inspector know, and we can walk through if you need any sort of additional licensing. Otherwise, the rules and regulations are very similar for shelters and pounds. We've also been getting some questions about sterilization. And so animal shelters and pounds have to adopt out animals that have either been already sterilized by a veterinarian or on a sterilization agreement. And so with those sterilization agreements, they have to be in writing. It has to be some sort of document. And the ownership of the animal is not transferred until the pound or until the dog or cat are sterilized. So the animal shelter or pound retains that ownership, but the animal can go to a home and that person can have custody of the animal. They just will not have ownership. And so with that agreement, it does need to be signed by the person that is receiving the animal and also a facility representative, and it needs to have the address of the person receiving the animal. I would suggest also adding phone number and or email address to that as well, but those are not necessarily required. And then there should be a time frame to complete the sterilization. Should be as soon as practically possible, but if, say, you're adopting an 8-week-old kitten, and you don't normally do pediatric spay and neuter with those kittens, you could put, you know, something in there by the time the kitten is 6 months old on such and such a date. And those can be extended. COVID was a prime example where a lot of these were extended, or animals that were normally sterilized were adopted out, not sterilized, but on a sterilization agreement, because a lot of veterinarians went to not doing elective surgeries to maintain, you know, PPE and drugs for the human healthcare side of things. And so there were some sterilization agreements that were put out there and then and or extended until the veterinarian started to do more of the elective procedures, which is fine. Now, once the animal shelter or pound receives confirmation that the sterilization has occurred, so like a receipt from a veterinarian or a medical record from a veterinarian, then that ownership can be transferred. Now, the shelter or the pound is responsible for enforcing those sterilization agreements. And so if what the inspectors want to see when they come in is that if there are sterilization agreements that they've been completed and that there's documentation that the animal has been spayed or neutered if that time frame has passed, or if there's an extension, why that extension has been given. Okay, so dealer. Dealers are a little bit different than animal shelters and pounds. And so a dealer is someone who buys a dog and then resells it, or sells dogs or exchanges dogs or cats. So exchange and adoption in animal welfare rules are used somewhat synonymously with one another. Now, dealers are not required to sterilize animals before adoption. However, it is highly encouraged. And the reason for that is that when the sterilization was put into code, it only referenced animal shelters and pounds and not dealers. Dealers are not required to be nonprofit, whereas animal shelters are. However, we did expand foster homes to dealers so that they can now have them. One of the main differences with dealers is they cannot take in unvaccinated dogs and cats, whereas animal shelters and pounds can. And not all dealers have facilities. Some of them are just a network where someone's running the organization, and then they just have foster homes. And so those are not inspected. Now, the foster homes have to be inspected by the dealer themselves, but there are some dealers that do have facilities, and those do have to meet the facility requirements in Chapter 67, which is different than what it was before, because the prior set of rules did not require that. Now, we did also create a subcategory license of a rescue. And so what a rescue is a person or a group of people that accept or purchase, exchange, solicit, and again, adopt and exchange are used pretty much synonymously with the intent of finding permanent adoptive homes for those dogs or cats. And so there needs to be a manager or someone who's kind of in charge of overseeing that rescue organization. And again, rescue, since they're a subcategory of a dealer, they're not required to sterilize animals, not required to be nonprofits, and they cannot take in unvaccinated animals. And if they do have a facility, it does have to meet requirements of Chapter 67. Okay, in-home facilities. We don't see in-home facilities a lot in the animal shelter or the pound world, more so with breeders. However, there are some rescues that have in-home facilities. And so they're limited to 6 adult dogs or cats. And again, adult is anything over 16 weeks of age, and a litter of puppies or kittens is not counted in that. These in-home facilities, they have to have a means and be able to isolate diseased animals, and they have to have primary enclosures for each animal. And then the surfaces in that, they don't have to be impervious to moisture, but they have to be some surfaces that are easy to clean and also maintained in good repair. Okay, let me talk a little bit about a pig dealer license. Just to clarify, this is something that's really come to light, that there's a lot more, especially pot-bellied pigs and pet pigs, that animal shelters and pounds are seeing. And so the thing to note is that in order for a facility to adopt a pig, the facility has to be licensed as a pig dealer. And every time a pig changes ownership, it has to have a certificate of veterinary inspection, and it has to be officially identified. So when an owner surrenders the pig, there has to be a CVI, and it has to be officially identified. And then when it's adopted out to a new owner, there has to be another CVI. So anytime any pig changes ownership in Iowa, there has to be a CVI, and there has to be some sort of identification on that pig. So official ID, there's several types of ear tags. There's little ones, there's big ones, there's more of like a plastic rubbery type one. There's small little ear clips, and so there's a whole bunch of variety, and you just have to decide what you're comfortable to. You can also do a premise tattoo, and so what that would be, typically those are tattoos in the ear or on the belly, but the facility would have to get a premise ID, and if anybody wants to know how to do that, I can walk them through it, and then they would tattoo that on the animal, so that way we know where the animal came from. As a lot of you know, it's really important for us to know where pigs are moving in the state. Some of you may or may not have heard of African swine fever, but also foot and mouth disease are foreign animal diseases that could very easily come into this country and decimate our entire pig population, or if it's foot and mouth disease, could actually any cloven hooved animals, so your cattle, your sheep and goats. And so it's really important for us to be able to trace these animals and where they've been and where they've gone. And we do that through those certificate of veterinary inspections. Okay, a couple more things. Dog and cat imports. So I want to make sure that everybody is aware that all dogs and cats coming into Iowa have to have a certificate of veterinary inspection. Now, one thing to note is that for dogs and cats, not for other animals, but they're valid for 30 days from the time the animal is examined. So if there's an animal that's examined today and the CVI is issued today, that CVI is good from for 30 days. And it's these are issued from who has the animal and then to where they're going. So they're not good for multiple movements, but they are good for 30 days. And that CVI has to state that that animal is free from disease or exposure to an infectious or contagious disease. So for example, that means not bringing in dogs that have been exposed to distemper or parvo until they're past that incubation period for those diseases. The other thing too is that all dogs over 4 months of age have to have a rabies vaccination. And so that has to be a USDA approved vaccination. It has to be current and done before they come into Iowa. Now, one exception for that is that if you've got a dog that's coming, you know, it's from Nebraska and it's coming into Iowa for vet care, it can come in without a CVI. But otherwise, animals that are coming in to go into a foster home, that are coming in to go into an animal shelter, that sort of thing, they have to have a CVI. And that's something that when the inspectors see that the dog is, say, from Illinois, they're going to look for a CVI as well. So make sure that you are getting those. And again, it goes to disease traceability. There are diseases that dogs can spread from one another and also to humans. And so we want to know and be able to trace where that dog came from and where it's been, so that we can control any disease outbreak that might happen. So we also received some questions about, well, what happens if I'm not compliant with the rules? And so what happens, and this is just kind of a really general high-level overview, is that that area of noncompliance is documented in the inspection report. And so the area of code that's non-compliant will be cited, and there's going to be a description of noncompliance. So an example would be the concrete floor in the dog exercise area has a 1-inch gap in it on the southeast wall or something like that. Just a very simple description. The inspectors may or may not take photo or video of the areas of noncompliance as well. And so that's how to document what is not compliant. Then in the inspection report and also in their conversation with the licensee, they'll talk about corrective actions that are needed. So for example, my concrete floor issue, they're going to say something about, well, it needs to be, that crack needs to be sealed or it needs to be repaired in some way. And it's up to the facility to decide how exactly they want to fix that. But that needs to be sealed or repaired in such a way that then that's impervious to moisture. Maybe it will be something to put it in. Then they'll put a time frame. So we'll say must be completed within 2 weeks or by such and such a date. So that'll all be documented in the inspection report. Then that way you can refer back to that inspection report to know what you have to do and how soon you need to do it by. And the inspectors are going to re-inspect to verify that compliance. If you're compliant on that re-inspection, then they're going to put that on the inspection report that, you know, the facility is now compliant, the concrete floor has now been repaired, replaced, whatnot. However, if there is repeated non-compliance, that eventually could lead to enforcement action. What that could be is that could be fines, could be suspension, that could be revocation. Now, we want to work with facilities. We want to see them making forward progress, that they're trying to repair things or trying to keep things in good repair. Well, we don't want these areas of non-compliance. We want things to be moving in a forward direction. However, if we repeatedly see the same things over and over again, or say, you know, hey, this needs to be fixed, and we go back and it's not fixed and it's not fixed again, that's when there could be enforcement action. Okay, and then there was a question about, well, what if I know of another facility that's not doing things like they should be? What can I do about it? And so we do have a mechanism for complaints. This complaint form is, again, on IDALS' animal welfare page. There's a button to click on that says needed forms, and if you click on animal industry, this is one of the many forms that's there. Complaints can remain anonymous. However, if this does lead to an enforcement action and then gets appealed and this goes to court, these will no longer be anonymous. But they need to contain firsthand knowledge. So things like, I went here and saw this, not I heard so-and-so say whatever. We need that so-and-so person to let us know, or I saw this on Facebook. It has to be firsthand knowledge. And we really need as much detail as possible. So if there's records to go along with it, if there's photos to go along with it, a narrative or a description, all of that is really good for us to be able to investigate the complaints. This here below is the website. But again, if you go to IDALS and animal industry, to the animal welfare section, you'll be able to get to this. And we can always email this out to somebody if they want it. Okay, this is the second to last slide. So we did create an FAQ section for animal welfare. The dog's trying to get in the office. Sorry about that. Anyway, so again, that's on IDALS Animal Welfare website, and there's a whole bunch of questions. We try to break it down into different categories. So there's ones that pertain to shelters, and some that pertain to dealers, and some that pertain to housing facilities, trying to make that pretty comprehensive. So I would encourage you, if you've got a question, to go review that. Two questions that come up all the time is, my location isn't zoned as a commercial business. So if I get a license, a state license, an animal welfare license, will that exempt me from my local rules that say I can't have a commercial business? And the answer is no. You need to make sure that you're looking at your local municipality rules as well. And then another one that comes up pretty frequently is that my municipality limits the number of animals, say, to 3 dogs and 3 cats in a residential home. Will having say a rescue license exempt me from that? And the answer to that is no as well. You have to, if there are rules that are more restrictive by your municipality, you have to follow those. Okay, I know there's been a bunch of people that have entered some questions via the chat, so we'll start with answering those. But if you do have additional questions, I would encourage you to reach out to your inspectors. They've all been to your facilities and they know your facilities best, and they are a great resource for you. They can come and they can, walk things through on the phone with you. You can take pictures and send them to them if you want to, know about things. They can also come out for a consultation as well. We really want people to reach out to us if they've got any questions, so that way when we go for inspections, there's not any surprise. The whole goal with inspections is to go in and everything's compliant and everything's good and things are maintained. But again, if you've got questions, reach out to them, but you can also contact myself. My email address is there. It's pretty easy. It's just my name with a dot in between. So katie.rumsey@iowaagriculture.gov. And you guys should all have your contact information for your inspectors.
Dr. Rumsey,
so
I've been copying the questions, so I just private chatted you some of the questions that were asked, so you don't have to look back in the feed.
Okay, yep, and I'm gonna stop screen sharing, and then so the first set, a whole bunch of questions are just about me not sharing my screen right. So I apologize for that in the beginning. And then the next one was about people being in the waiting room. And I let people in as I saw them. There was one person that I just kept letting them in, but they never seemed to be able to connect. So there must have been some connectivity issues on their end. Okay, so one of the first questions is, do inspectors consider cat enclosures like large cages as having sufficient room for exercise, or are cats required to be removed from kennels twice a day? So really it depends upon how many cats are in that large cage and how big that cage is. So can they get around? Can they move around? Can they exercise? Do they have toys that they can bat around and that sort of thing? So I think, I know that's a very general answer, but that would be worth consulting with your inspector to look at that specifically. So that picture that I showed with those 2 kittens in that kennel, that's enough for them to run around and move around and whatnot. But again, it's kind of difficult to answer without seeing actually, how many cats are in that enclosure and what size that one is. So next question, is the 20 foster homes total that are fostering animals at one time? Can you have more than 20 foster homes, but only 20 that are active? So that's the total of available foster homes. And so if you want more available foster homes, then you need to apply for more, and that's in the second year. And that's part of the information that you would give us would be, as an example, I want 50 foster homes to have available at any one time. However, we would limit the use to 25 because we only have so many people to oversee them, so on and so forth. And so hopefully that clarifies that. So So what if the foster home is outside the state of Iowa? So IDALS only regulates what's happening within the state of Iowa. So you're going to have to contact that state, so say it's Nebraska, and find out what their rules are on foster homes with that. And then to the next question, so along those same lines with foster homes, what about hospice pets? So if the hospice pet, you know, again, they can be adopted out or into a hospice home, or if they go into a foster home, they can be, but there's still the limit on the number of animals that are there. But it's 6 total animals in the house, whether it's own pets or foster pets. So for example, I have 2 dogs and 2 cats. So as a foster home, I would only be able to foster 2 additional animals. So hopefully that makes sense. So there's a question about a rescue reservation. So like a rescuing animals from a reservation that doesn't have an animal shelter or a pound. Do those animals need to be vaccinated before? So they need to be, someone has those dogs or has ownership of those dogs. And so before that ownership is transferred to the rescue, those animals need to be vaccinated. And that can look different in a number of different ways. It could be that there's a veterinarian that goes out, vaccinates the animals, and then ownership is transferred. It could be that the rescue meets the owner at a veterinary hospital, the animal's vaccinated, and then ownership is changed. It's up to the rescue whether it's the owner that pays for that vaccination or the rescue to take it. But before the rescue takes ownership of the animal, they have to be vaccinated. Hopefully that makes sense. And I'm not sure I quite understand this question. So it says, so I am clear on the CVI, that is a dog that is not emergent or otherwise in need of immediate medical care. So you cannot import dogs or cats that have been exposed to or have clinical signs of an infectious or contagious disease. So they have to be healthy, so not exposed to or infected, as an example, to parvovirus, that sort of thing. If they're stable and undergoing treatment, so say it's a heartworm positive dog that's undergoing treatment and it's stable and the vet says that it can travel, then that's fine as long as treatment is continued. There's another question here about, so dogs that are, you know, say that they're in Northeast Nebraska and the vet's in Northwest Iowa, those dogs can go to the vet in Iowa without a CVI. So I want to make that clear. If it's coming into Iowa for vet care, then that's fine. Someone asked if the slides will be available later. Yes, and we're trying to record this presentation, so hopefully that has gone like it should, so that way it's available as well. Oh, we have the same cat exercise question again. Looks like I've got some duplicate questions here. Give me a second to read through these. Okay, so then one of the questions that came up was that if we're an animal shelter, do we need a pound license to take in stray animals from cities and counties? And so if you're taking in stray animals that are picked up by the police department, that are picked up by animal control, there's a 28E agreement to care for those, then yes, you do need a pound license. Someone asked about carpet, particularly carpet cat tree. They're not an approved structure that can be efficiently sanitized. Carpet's a hard one because you can clean carpet with a carpet cleaner, with a steam cleaner. You could put disinfectant on it, but it's porous, and then usually underneath that is kind of cardboard or MDF or that sort of thing that things like urine can get through and leach through. And so those are really not great to have. And again, they can't be easily cleaned and sanitized. You can do alternatives to carpet on that. But kind of your typical cat tree that you find in a household, that's going to be very, very difficult to clean and sanitize. If you ever get a problem with fleas, that's another thing that's going to be really difficult to get all the flea eggs and the pupa out of as well. So I wouldn't recommend those. Someone asked about local municipality rules. So the question is, if Sioux City says 2 pets of the same kind, no more than 3 total, how does that play in? Again, if the municipality is more restrictive, then you have to follow those rules. So for example, if you live someplace that says 3 dogs and 3 cats, and I only have 2 dogs, I can't foster 2 more dogs, even though I'm under the 6, because the city that I live in says I can only have 3 dogs. So hopefully that makes sense. Someone wrote, as a shelter required to alter an animal prior to his adoption, for hospice or senior adoption, do those animals need to be altered? Would that paperwork be needed? I do not believe that there is an age or medical exemption in code, but I will review that and then get back to all of you on that question. I don't remember exactly off the top of my head, but I believe that there is not an exemption for that. But let me review that again. And then any questions like this, I will email the answer to Randy. So Randy, if you can keep track of that question, that'd be great. And then it'll get emailed out to all of you, so everybody has the answer, not just the person that's asking it. There's more questions about the 6-pet rule for fostering during the COVID pandemic. So that shelters, the general gist of it is that shelters are taking in animals and then trying to get them out into foster homes instead of being in the shelter, so that they can be prepared in case of something that happens with the pandemic. And so in situations like that, if there's a situation that develops in which a rule needs to be waived temporarily because there are extenuating circumstances, there is a waiver process, and you can contact your inspector or myself about that. I will say during the COVID pandemic, no one submitted any sort of waiver request for that. And so that would be a temporary relaxation of the rules. We saw that the governor did do that for a bunch of different rules. One example would be like alcoholic drinks, not being able to consume those off premises, but then she let bars, dispense those mixed drinks and things like that. And that was a exemption. But through IDALS, we have what's called a waiver process. And so if we run into that, those are definitely things that can be discussed on a case-by-case basis, and we can work through those. Someone asked about the age required for rabies vaccination. And so animals can be vaccinated per the label on most rabies vaccines at 12 weeks of age. And so that's when they should be vaccinated, is right about that age. If a veterinarian wants to delay that vaccination for some reason, they can put that off. And then for households, those animals have to be rabies vaccinated by 6 months of age. So we want you to basically, with vaccines, we want you to follow the manufacturer's labeled instructions for those. There's people asking about chickens and geese and stuff like that. So stray chickens or relinquished backyard chickens and stuff. And like I said earlier, so pigs and sheep have specific requirements. With the chickens, there's a dealer license if you're selling baby chicks, but not adults or adopting them out. The one thing to know with livestock, though, is that you do always want to look at the movement requirements or the change of ownership requirements, and is a CVI required? Is there some sort of identification that's required? And we can put you in contact with Carla, who works in the animal industry, who deals a lot with those. Okay, so then there's another question about when housing group cats, is there space requirement for 12 cats, or depending on the size of the area that you can have? So there has to be enough room. So if you've got 12 cats, there has to be enough room for them to move around freely, not be on top of one another, have spaces their food and water is not contaminated when they're using the litter box, they're not kicking litter out on it. And then you also have to have room for the elevated resting surfaces. And so, and part of it depends upon the size of the cat and the activity level of the cat as well. And so that is a use your best judgment. We did not go with with super specific. They need to be able to, again, move around freely, not be piled on top of one another, each have their own resting surface, have their own elevated resting surface, and not have the litter and water be too close to one another. So those are the things that the inspectors are looking for, but it's not necessarily a 10 by 10 room. Or a 12 by 12 room or whatnot. Some people get really creative with those elevated surfaces that they're using and can then utilize a smaller room. Others don't have a whole lot of vertical space, so they're using more horizontal space. So again, if you've got specific questions about what you have, then consult with your inspectors. Someone said, is there any kind of grandfathering in for more restrictive municipality rules that drastically changes the way that foster-based rescues would be able to provide services? That actually has always been the case, where municipalities can be more restrictive than state rules. It's never not been that way. And so there is no sort of grandfathering for that. That is something that people need to be aware of. There are certain municipalities that are enforced that way stricter than others, but it is up to them if and when they want to enforce those. So I would urge you that if your municipality has those rules about the number of animals that can be in a residence, that you contact them. They may allow exceptions, but that is up to them. That is not something that IDALS can change. So again, if you're operating in a municipality, you need to figure out what your rules and regulations are. Some municipalities will consider a rescue to be a business and won't allow it to be operated out of a home, but they may say that foster homes are okay. So you've got to run that by the local municipality. So there's a lot of duplicate questions. So I'm just going through these to make sure I get all of them. Are there any rules about moving a cat with a URI or a dog with kennel cough to a foster home? And so the rules would be, you know, if the animal's sick, it needs to be receiving veterinary care. If it has a contagious disease, then that foster home has to have the ability to isolate it from other susceptible species within its home. If it's a dog with kennel cough that's going to a no animal household, then that could be fine, because that gets it out of the facility. Foster homes could certainly serve as isolation, but they have to have a way to keep the other animals in the household healthy. So there's another question, again, I'll clarify with the rescues, is that the animal has to be vaccinated before the rescue officially takes ownership of that animal. So what that looks like beforehand can look like in a whole different ways. I gave a couple of examples before with that. So if anybody has any specific questions, or if they want to run, you know, well, what if I do X, Y, and Z, run those by your inspector, and we can talk through those specifically. Again, there's more questions about the municipality rules, and again, those supersede IDALS rules. They always have. I'm just trying to make sure that everybody understands that, so they don't get caught up with that and get in trouble from the municipality. So question, clarification on contagious disease and adoption. So FIV, FLV adoption is okay. And so the answer is, if the animal is stable, it's not having any secondary conditions as a result of that, then yes, it needs to be an informed adoption so that the adopter knows of those risks. But if the animal is not actively ill from it, then yes, adopting out a chronic animal is fine. So ringworm, another question, would ringworm or lice have to be completely resolved prior to adoption? And the answer to that is yes. Now, that adoptive home could serve as a foster home potentially and isolate and continue treatment, but that chain of ownership cannot happen until the animal is not contagious. The thing to remember about ringworm is that it's also contagious to people, especially the young, the old, and those that are immune compromised. And so you need to make sure that all those precautions are in place before that animal is transferred, but it cannot be adopted until things are resolved. Next question is there anything that prevents a foster home from isolating, treating a kitten with ringworm or lice? And so the answer to that is yes and no. The foster home has to have the ability to isolate that animal, and then the foster organization has to trust that the animal is going to receive the care that it is. But the big thing is being able to isolate it and then prevent that disease from, ringworm, for example, from spreading to other animals or to people. Are fecals required for every adoptable prior to adoption? So there's not a requirement for fecals. Is that a good idea to make sure that they don't have, roundworms, hookworms, whipworms? That's always a good idea, but not every facility has the capability to be able to do that. Now, if you've got a dog that has diarrhea, that's thin, not gaining weight, those sort of things where it's not a healthy animal, it does not look healthy, that's when you take it to the veterinarian and decide if a fecal is necessary. There are some facilities that do run fecals, and that's a great best practice, but it's not a requirement. Okay, I think I got through a lot of the list of questions. Oh, maybe not. Looks like there's some more coming in. Oh, Preston, thank you. Preston just said thank you and wanted to thank the IDALS staff for attending the webinar and working hard to educate. So I realized too that I threw hang on a second. Sorry, the joys of working from home, kids and dogs. I realized there is a lot of information that was presented here really, really quickly. And so there may be some confusion. There may be some questions that happen afterwards. You may sleep on it and have some more questions. Please, please, please reach out to us. We want to answer these questions. We want to make sure that everybody's along the right lines. Our goal is the health and the welfare of these animals. It's not about catching people because something's not compliant. It's about making sure that these minimum standards are met. We absolutely encourage best practices if you can do those. But again, we really want these minimum standards to be met to ensure the safety and the welfare of these animals. So please, please, please reach out to us for questions. Again, the inspectors are great resources, and then you've got my email address. That's probably the best way, the quickest way for me to respond is email. You can always give me a call as well. I'll open it up. Are there any more last minute questions? And then I'll let Randy take over.
I have one more that was sent to me in email, but not by chat. So the question is, no one is allowed to foster in Sioux City if they already have 2 dogs and a cat, or 2 cats and a dog?
So I don't know exactly what Sioux City's rules are, but I would urge you to contact Sioux City and ask them. They may not enforce the regulations of the number of animals in a residence if it's a foster animal, but they very well could. And so that's something to ask them. But there are a lot of municipalities, Des Moines, for example, is one of those that they will enforce that, and fosters count towards the number of animals in a residence. So for them, I believe it's, don't quote me on this, but I believe it's 6 dogs. So if you have 6 dogs, you can't foster 2 more.
That's all I got.
Okay, well, I want to thank everybody for attending. I hope that this was informative and that things are going well. Like I said, reach out, ask questions. That's what we're here for.
Dr. Rumsey, I just want to say really a huge thank you from all of us. You're generous with your time. You've been patient with all the crazy questions coming in and the duplicates, and it's not crazy questions, but just the influx of the questions, I should say. And I just really, I really want to thank you. I think everybody on this call got a lot out of this, and I know there's more. So again, everyone can, email you if you want. They can email the Tri-State Coalition. I'll make sure to get those questions to you. There were some people who were doing through the chat who hadn't included their contact information. So if you did send questions through the chat and you did not put your contact information and you still feel like you want those questions answered, please just go through the chat and send your contact info. But Dr. Rumsey, I think you really did. You answered all those questions that came in, and just thank you so much from everybody here, from the Tri-State Coalition, and from me personally. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. And if we find that there's a need for another one, or if there's another topic that you guys want me to discuss, just let me know.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye, everybody.